What's up? Hello everyone, my name is Zach, welcome back to my channel. After weeks of holidays and all sorts of family crap, I have the house to myself right now, which is amazing! I'm not sure how long I'm going to have the house to myself, so I need to kind of move this along kind of quickly, so I'm sorry if I'm talking a little fast, but we gotta get moving, because I know my dad's coming home at some point this afternoon, and I don't want him to walk in while I'm trying to record this, so... But anyway, I needed to do some sort of year-end video for 2019, and I decided to combine an idea from two booktubers that I love. The first one is Jordan Harvey, who at the beginning of last year did a ranking all of my 2018 reads. Hopefully she'll do that again for 2019, but she hasn't yet. And then also Maddie the Book Pusher, who did tier ranking Jay Kristoff books. So I decided to kind of combine the two and do a tier ranking of all the books I read in 2019. If I counted correctly, I read 63 things in 2019, but I will only be ranking 55 because I will be ranking an entire graphic novel series as one entry, so I don't have to rank all 9 because I don't really need to. But anyway, let me show you all these tiers I have set up, and then let's start ranking. Alright, so Screencast decided to do me dirty and stop recording halfway through, so I guess I'm starting over. So here are the tiers I have. They're all based on songs I really like. And they're more kind of categorizations, but they are kind of ranked by enjoyment level. So first up here is Kiss on My List, which is a Hall & Oates song, and these are all like my favorites of the year, books I really loved. She's So Respectable, which is a Rolling Stones song. These are books I thought were really good, maybe not favorites, but objectively quality reads. Dirty Little Secret by the All American Rejects. This is like guilty pleasure type reads. Any book that I enjoyed but maybe wouldn't want to be seen reading in public, that kind of thing. I Feel Fine, which is a Beatles song. This is kind of the neutral category, the mixed bad category. Just any book I'm just kind of meh on. I Ain't the One, which is a Leonard Skinner song. I love me some Leonard Skinner. These are books I think have objective qualities, or I could see why other people might enjoy them, but it just wasn't something I really enjoyed, or wasn't really a book for me. Ain't That Pretty at All, which is a Warren Zevon song, and this is books that I did not enjoy and think are kind of bad. And then the last one here is Your Guts, I Hate 'Em, which is a Real Big Fish song. And these are the books I really despised in the year of 2019. So let's go ahead and start ranking some books. Alright, so first up we have Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I could see why so many people are affected by this book and why it's some people's favorite book. Unfortunately, I read this after I had my college freak out, and then after I was in college and kind of had a life crisis and trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life and change my major and all that stuff. So while I think it's good, I ain't the one it was really meant for, and I'm not the one who kind of needed it. So there it goes. Alright, next up is Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis, which is the second book in the Chronicles of Narnia series, if you're reading them in publication order like I am. Certainly thought it was a good book. I enjoyed it. Not a favorite, but certainly a respectable fantasy book. Repeat Cheap, I think is how you say it. The rat and or the mouse and Trumpkin are definitely the best characters in this book. So we're gonna put that there. All right. So next up we have Dracula by Bram Stoker, and a lot of people don't like this book. They say it's boring. They say it's confusing. I think if you're going to read it, definitely get an audiobook with a full cast. It really helps with the shifting perspectives. But I certainly saw why it was a horror classic, and I really enjoyed it. So this one's also going to be under the She's So Respectable category. Alright, next we have Arthur Miller's The Crucible, and a lot of people seem to not like this book, but this is one of the books I read in school that I enjoyed the most, and it's the first one I read in school that I've actually reread since I left school, so I love this book, and it is going top tier. If you enjoyed this book too, can you let me know? Does anyone else like this book? Or it's a play, but a play's a book, whatever. Alright, next up we have Robert A. Heinlein's Space Cadet. I read Starship Troopers in 2018 and really enjoyed it, and honestly, this is kind of like a YA Baby's First Starship Troopers, so honestly, I feel fine. It was okay. But would certainly recommend you read a different one of his books before I would recommend this one. Alright, so next up I read Beowulf. This was kind of an interesting read to kind of see early literature, but I didn't really find it that interesting, and it was kind of weird and hard to read because of the format of it being in a song or whatever. But I will point out, There were a lot of dinners and men drinking together and sleeping around one another, and kind of feel like this is like early gay literature. Um, I'm only sort of joking. If you're looking for gay literature, don't read this for that. But it was just something I noticed. But I feel fine. I mean, it was what I wanted it to be, which was early literature, an early look at what the foundations of literature were. So it was okay. All right, next up we have the second book in the Resident Evil series. This one's called Caliban Cove, and I was really interested to read this one because it's the first original novel that S.D. Perry wrote. It's not a novelization of one of the games, and I was kind of interested to see how she would write in this world, and she did a great job. Unfortunately, I would not be caught dead reading this book in public, so it's going under my dirty little secret. Definite guilty pleasure for sure. I love this series, but it is hot garbage. Alright, next up we have Feed by Mira Grant, which I actually kind of forgot I actually finished in 2019 and not 2018, but this one's going right to the top tier. I never shut up about this book, so you guys already know. Do I even really need to say anything? If you need me to, go back and find other videos where I talk about it, because I talk about it a lot. Alright, next up is another classic. This is The Moon is Down by John Steinbeck, which I have not liked John Steinbeck in the past, but this was apparently the John Steinbeck book for me. It's a really good anti-war novel. It really humanizes kind of both sides of war, and it was absolutely beautiful in my opinion, so this one's also going to go kiss on my list. Alright, so next up we have Deadline, which is the sequel to Feed. I didn't enjoy this as much as Feed, but I still thought it was really good. It was a great sequel to Feed, and I find it really impressive when a author writes across gender lines, as well as Mira Grant, who is Shauna Maguire, does in this book, so this one's also going top tier. Do not worry, we will eventually stop putting things top tier. Alright, so I believe at this point is when I started doing audiobookathon, and the first thing I read for that was Arthur Miller's Incident at Vichy, which is another fantastic play by Arthur Miller. Also really enjoyed this one. Not as much as The Crucible, so we're going to put it under She's So Respectable. Alright, so next up we have Star Wars Allegiance by Timothy Zahn. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting Timothy Zahn in person. He's a great guy, and he writes great Star Wars novels. So this one, I think, is going to also go under She's So Respectable. Again, if you're looking for a good Star Wars novel set in the original 6-movie canon, this is one I highly recommend. Alright, next, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I will be honest, I did not want to read this book. I read for escapism, and reading a book that is so involved with kind of current social problems and political problems just did not seem like a book I was going to enjoy. But everyone was yelling at me, and I was like, I'm sensitive, okay? Stop yelling at me, I'll just read it. And I am so glad that I did, because this book is amazing. It is incredible. If you are still sleeping on it, you need to stop. Don't give this one a pass just because it doesn't seem like something you'd enjoy, because it is fantastic. Alright, so next we have Blackout by Mira Grant, which is the last book in the Newsflesh trilogy, and I just really was not a fan of some of the choices Mira Grant made, especially towards the end of this book. So this is going towards I Ain't the One, because maybe some people enjoyed the choices that were made in regards to some characters' decisions, but I certainly was not happy with it. So next up we have The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which for a while I used to say was my favorite book of all time, back when I read it in 9th grade. I didn't enjoy it as much as I remember enjoying it, but I still think it is a respectable read, and if you like thrillers or horror, this is one you should definitely have on your bucket list, and if you want to start in those genres, it's a great place to start because it's not that intense, and it's very early on in both of those genres, so we're still going to say that this is very respectable. Alright, next up we have another book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. This is Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Still enjoyed this one. Still wasn't a favorite though. Still going to say it's respectable because it is still a ton of fun and still, in my opinion, a great fantasy read. So, there you go. Alright, so next up we have Six of Crows. And do I even really need to say anything about Six of Crows? It's going top tier. We all been new. And of course that leads into Cricket Kingdom. And I know a lot of people prefer Cricket Kingdom to Six of Crows, but I prefer Six of Crows. I think the slower moments at the start of Six of Crows allows for some better character moments, which I was wanting more of in Cricket Kingdom, so I'm going to put this one in respectable. Also was not a fan of what Lee decided to do with some parts of the ending. If you've read it, you probably know what I mean, but let's just say something happens that I did not want to happen, so there you go. Alright, so next up we have Silent Hill Downpour and Story. This was the point in the year where I started to try out some graphic novels, and I had owned this one for years and never read it, and it's going bottom of the barrel. This comic is terrible. It's a pathetic attempt at a horror comic. It's a pathetic attempt at a Silent Hill comic. It was just really bad. And next up we have Deadpool v. Gambit. That's hard to say for some reason. And this is also was just very disappointing. With a title like that, you're expecting a more fun adventure, but it was kind of a mess. And I thought it was just me not understanding comics, but when I read the other reviews on Goodreads, most people kind of echoed my thoughts. But there were enough fun and funny bits that I'm going to put this at Ain't That Pretty at All and not at the bottom of the barrel. Alright, so next up we have the first edition of Stephen King's The Stand. And I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think it's respectable. I think the graphic novel format is going to be a good one for reading King, especially a Stephen King book this long, because King has a tendency to overwrite. So I think I'm going to stick with the graphic novels of The Stand versus reading it. But I really enjoyed it. The art was really good, and I'm interested to see where the story goes when I actually pick it back up, which I have not for like 5 months. I'm the best booktuber, yo. Alright, next up we have the complete poetry of Edgar Allan Poe, and I have struggled with poetry, and I was hoping this was going to be the poetry collection for me because I enjoy Edgar Allan Poe's kind of dark writing and the macabre and all that, but you don't really get much of it till like the very end of this collection, and I still have a hard time rating poetry because I don't know if it's just me not liking poetry or if it's just not good poetry. So I'm going to put I Ain't the One on this one because I have a feeling people who enjoy poetry will enjoy this a lot more than I did, and there were a handful of poems that I did really enjoy. Alright, next up we have A Crow with No Mouth by Ikuyu, I think is how you say it. And this was the poetry collection for me. I loved it. It's a it is a Buddhist Zen poetry collection. That took way more takes than it should have. But it was a very different take on Buddhism, and for a Zen poetry collection, it's actually kind of lit. And I'm not using that as a joke. It's there's alcohol, there's anger, there's drinking, there's fights. It's something else. I highly recommend it. I love the hell out of it. Alright, next we have Dean Koontz Frankenstein Book 1. I'm really enjoying this series. I'm just going to go ahead and slap it up here at the top tier. I will say it is a kind of fun thriller horror retelling of Frankenstein. There is some serious subject matter. There is like domestic abuse and sexual violence, so when I say fun, it's not like super lighthearted, but if you don't mind reading about that kind of thing, especially in the context of someone who's horrible doing horrible things, I highly recommend checking out this series. I enjoyed it. I am enjoying it way more than I enjoyed the original Frankenstein, so highly recommend. And next up we have the last Arthur Miller play of the year, which is All My Sons, and I really enjoy Arthur Miller, but this one just missed the mark for me. It was confusing, I wasn't really sure what the plot was, it was all over the place, and it just wasn't that good. So, we're putting it at Ain't That Pretty at All. Alright, next up is Star Wars Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber, and this book is hot garbage. It is my ultimate guilty pleasure book. I enjoyed this as much as I did when I read it for the first time when I was 14. Can't really recommend it to anyone unless you're the kind of person that loves both zombies and Star Wars, but if you are, maybe try it out because it's fun and it's not that long. Alright, next up we have This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. I thought this book was okay. It was kind of a mixed bag. I really enjoyed August, but I didn't enjoy Kate that much, and it was just kind of simple, and so I think I'm going to put this at I Feel Fine. Not bad, but also I feel like it could have been a lot better for the hype it received, so Alright, next up we have The Famous Saga, and this is the reason why this is 55 things and not 63, because I'm ranking all of Saga as just one thing, and it's going top tier. I love the art, I love the story, it's heartbreaking, it's amazing, I love all the different fantasy elements, I love the sci-fi elements, I love the creativity. It's just such a great series. I cannot recommend this series enough. If you like graphic novels, if you like science fiction, if you like fantasy, pick up Saga if you haven't already. I don't know why you wouldn't have tried it already, seeing how everyone talks about it, but if you haven't, you need to do it. All right, next up we have Cinder, the first book in the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. And I know some people really love Cinder. Cinderella was never one of my favorite fairy tales, and I think this book suffers as you read the sequels because the sequels get better and better and you get more and more interesting characters. In this book, it's just fine. It's a sort of interesting retelling of Cinderella, which I was never the biggest fan of in the first place, so it's alright. But you know what's better than alright? Scarlet by Marissa Meyer, the second book in the Lunar Chronicles. This is where Marissa Meyer really hits her stride. She starts to introduce characters that I cared for a lot more and liked a lot more. So this is going under respectable because I enjoyed this way more than Cinder. Alright, next up we have Elevation by Stephen King, which is one of his novellas, despite the fact that the cover of the book says it's a novel. It's a novella. And I'm trying to read all Stephen King's novellas, so I just ended up reading this to get it out of the way. And it just leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion. It feels like a novel he stopped writing halfway through and made what should have been the turning point of the story, the end of the story, and I didn't really like it. It wasn't that great, in my opinion. All right, next up we have I have a 45-minute video if you want to hear more about that, but I ain't talking about that today. Alright, another book I have a full review on, Neal Shusterman's Unwind, which, in retrospect, I really love this book because it was the start of a lot of great things on my channel. This is how I became friends with the members of Paper Cut Book Club. Well, Kat watched me before I did this review, but this is how I started talking with Jordan and Cindy, so it has a special place in my heart. But as far as the book itself, removed from that context, yeah, I cannot say I enjoyed this. And I know some of you are probably expecting me to slap this down on your guts, but I don't think it was that bad. The premise is flawed and the world building is kind of terrible, but given those two things, I think this is the best novel you could get working with that premise. Neal Shusterman really shouldn't have worked with that premise, but he did the best job he could, given the fact that he severely handicapped himself with a terrible premise and terrible world building. Alright, next up another Star Wars book. This is The Paradise Snare by A.C. Crispin, which is the first book in the Han Solo trilogy from the old Star Wars canon. I really enjoyed this, but I can't get over the fact that most of these Star Wars books, I'm just like, I'm reading published fan fiction that I paid for. So this is going under a dirty little secret. If you do want to read some sci-fi by a female author, this is a good place to start if you're a Star Wars fan, because the A in A.C. Crispin stands for Anne. And she does a great job at writing a male character like Han Solo. So, God clap to her. It's very good, but still not something I would read in public. Alright, next we have the first volume of Joe Hill's Lock and Key. I wanted to like this more than I did. I thought it was okay. I wasn't really into the art style. I wasn't really connecting with the plot. Maybe if I go back and try to read all of it or watch the Netflix show, my opinions will change. But for now, it's going right there in the neutral category of I feel fine. Alright, next up we have Crest, the third book in the Lunar Chronicles. And this is the point, I think, where Marissa Meyer really just knocked it out of the park. This book is absolutely incredible. It is going top tier. I just think it's an amazing book. We get introduced to Crest, who's one of my favorite characters, and we get to see her and Thorn interact, which is just the best ever. I freaking love that story. So, top tier, obviously. Alright, and next up we have Fairest, which is a novella for the Lunar Chronicles leading into winter. I did not finish winter in 2019, so unfortunately you will not see that today. And Fairest, some people really like this novella, and I didn't get the point of it. I didn't really see what the story was. I didn't see why we needed it necessarily. I feel like you could have easily put this in a couple of paragraphs in one of the other books. So, ironically, like Lavana, this book ain't that pretty at all, in my opinion. I think it's kind of useless novella. So, sorry, Marissa Meyer, but I didn't like that one. Alright, next up we have the famous Illuminate by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. And I respect this book, and I think it's a good place for people who aren't the biggest sci-fi fans to maybe get started, and I think the format is really fun and interesting until it starts to kind of repeat a bunch of things towards the end because it's got to finish up the story. Unfortunately for me, I'm a big Star Trek fan, and this book rips off a lot of bits from different episodes of the original series, and that really kind of hindered my enjoyment, but I certainly think it is a respectable book, and so I'm going to put it there, despite the fact that it's not really one of my favorites. All right, The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. Not going to talk about this one for too long because I was on the Papercut Book Club live show talking about this book for like an hour. So if you really want to hear thoughts, you can go there. However, I think it's a beautiful book, a beautiful story, beautifully written. It's just flowery enough to be beautiful, but not too flowery to be annoying. And I think it's a great book for kids and kids at heart like me. So this is also going top tier. Alright, next up we have I Hate Fairyland Volume 1 by Skottie Young. I liken this graphic novel to a South Park gag where you laugh because it's horrible and it's so just like graphic and you should be like offended or disturbed or something, but you're too busy laughing to really take that into account. So I think it's a ton of fun. If you are squeamish, don't read this because it is very gory and gross and graphic. But I certainly really liked it, so we're going to put that up there. Alright, next we have The Mighty Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, and I can't say enough good things about this book. I loved it. It's worth the hype. If you haven't read it already, please do, because I adore this book. Alright, Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I was kind of prepared for this book because everyone said it wasn't that good going in, so when I got there and it wasn't great, was what I expected it to be. I think it's very generic. It does kind of lose focus of the plot. In the back half, there's like a whole portion where you're like, what's happening? Why are we doing this? What? But at the end of the day, I feel fine. I feel like it was a good start to the Grishaverse, and it did an okay job laying the foundation, but it just doesn't hold a candle to Six of Crows. So, unfortunately, I didn't read either of the other two books in the Grisha trilogy, so you'll have to wait for that next year. Or this year, rather. Years are hard. Alright, next up we have God's Grave by Jay Kristoff, the sequel to Nevernight. A lot of people rate this one higher than Nevernight, and I think a lot of people would say this is the best or their favorite of the trilogy. But that wasn't me. I thought this sequel was weird. It was still good and everything, but I'm going to put this under I Ain't the One because I just did not get this Gladiator fanfic reworked into the Nevernight sequel. It was just really weird and out there. And then also the romance that buds in this book, not a fan. I know that ship has its supporters, but I ain't one of them, so I ain't the one. It was a good book, but it was not the Nevernight book for me. It's definitely my least favorite of the trilogy. And then we have Dark Dawn, the conclusion of the trilogy, and to me, this kind of recaptured the magic of the first book. It broke me in all the ways I wanted. I laughed, I cried, I loved it, I hated it. It's got to go top tier. Jay Kristoff is a madman, and you know I don't know what else to say about it. I'm like tearing up just thinking about how much it hurt me. Reese with Rachel, you need to finish it, ma'am. I'm not even worried about getting it back fast. I just want you to finish it so I can talk to you about it. So I'm calling you out, Rachel. Alright, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. This is a weird one because I think this is objectively a really great novel. It's very thought-provoking and interesting. However, because it was so heavy and required so much thought, I found that I respected it more than I really enjoyed it. So this is definitely going under respectable, though if you are looking for a diverse read, if you're looking for a book by an author of color with sci-fi elements or a lot of philosophy in it, definitely read this book. It is definitely a great literary piece, and I think this is the book that won her the MacArthur Genius Grant. If not, it's by a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant. So Octavia Butler is definitely a great author. Alright, so next up we have Sorcery Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. Definitely kind of neutral in this one. It was a little generic, but I definitely don't think it was bad, and I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a simple fantasy kind of romance tale, and if that's what you're looking for, I think you'll have fun. Alright, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I have seen this appear on 2 worst books of the year lists, which just breaks my heart because I thought this book was amazing. I loved every second of it. I loved the style, I loved the story, and this is going top tier for me, one of the year's best books. So if you put it on the worst books list, I respect your opinion. You're entitled to have your opinion, but I just don't understand. How? It's The Night Circus, man. I'm sad. Alright, Alien Echo by Mira Grant. This kind of echoes my thoughts on reading the Star Wars books, where I'm reading officially licensed and published Alien fanfiction. But it is by Mira Grant, who I adore, and I think it is a great novel, and it captures kind of the dread and horror of Alien. And also, it's a YA sci-fi horror book with lesbians, so if that sounds like something that's right up your alley, I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly did, but I certainly do not want to be seen reading it in public. So it's a dirty little secret, so shh. Alright, Stephen King Cell, another one I have a whole video on. Another one that I don't think deserves the lowest tier, but it certainly was not good. So we're going to put that right there. Alright, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paula Tremblay. This was a thriller. I just didn't really get what the author was trying to do with this book. I really don't like thrillers where the idea is trying to force people to hurt each other or kill one another, which is a big part of the premise of this novel. So it just wasn't for me. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thriller, but I just don't love thrillers, so take that for what you will. Alright, Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I have a whole reading blog of this, but essentially, I think if you love world building, if you love Dark Academia, this will be a book for you, but I don't really love those things, so it certainly was not for me either. But not a bad book by any means, so there you go. Alright, The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. I read this for Booathon. This is a horror novella, and I absolutely loved this. I want to reread it again because I had to kind of rush through it for Booathon, and I want to take more time to look at the small details and appreciate it a little more. And I also definitely want to read more Victor LaValle. I know my library has at least one more of his full novels, so expect me to read that at some point during the year. You can hold me accountable. I will talk about it. And this is going top tier. I have been shouting from the rooftops about this book. I'm like Meryl Streep, read The Ballad of Black Tom! Because I loved it. I really enjoy novellas because I'm a slow reader, and novellas are short by definition. But I think this is just really great. If you want to read Lovecraft but don't want to read the racism of Lovecraft, if you want to read horror by an author of color, if you want to read a horror book that incorporates the black experience of 1920s New York, if any of those things interest you, Ballad of Black Tom, do it. Now. Alright, so next up we have Dean Koontz Frankenstein, Book 2, City of Night. Copy-paste my whole speech from the first Dean Koontz Frankenstein to this one. I think it moves the story along quite nicely. I don't think it suffered from like second book or middle book syndrome. So we're also going to put this top tier. I also really enjoyed it. It's just a really fun Frankenstein retelling, as long as you don't mind those things I mentioned with the first book. Alright, next up we have Gods of Jade and Shadow. I really enjoyed this book. It's a really interesting fantasy book that I think works in, I think it's Mayan folklore and legends and all that. I think if you're looking for a diverse fantasy read, just kind of a fun fantasy read, I think it's a great one. I'm going to put it under respectable, because I don't know if it'd be a favorite of mine, but certainly enjoyed it and certainly recommend it if that's what you're looking for. Alright, next up we have The Infamous Wool by Hugh Howey. This was a book for Paper Cup Book Club that basically everyone hated. Lots of people gave it 1 star, and while I certainly wouldn't say it was great, I don't think I hated it that much, so I'm not going to smack it down at the bottom. It certainly, I think, was not good and had a ton of issues, so I'm definitely going to say it ain't that pretty at all, but I don't understand the kind of vitriol this book suffered, because I have read far worse with a lot more egregious things than just, some lackluster dystopians, so take that for what you will, I guess. I feel like I've said that a lot this video. Alright, and the last book I finished in 2019 was Christine by Stephen King. I buddy read this with Kat from Paperback Dreams, and we both agree that we really enjoyed the experience of reading this with one another and having someone to talk with and bitch about. And we also agree that this book was not it, Chief. It's like a fun B-movie setup, but it's stretched out to 650 pages, and you don't get that much fun kind of B-movie monster scenes of watching evil things do evil things. And that's really what I think we both wanted. That's certainly what I wanted, and instead you got a bunch of human drama and just it dragged on and on and on, and I don't think it's worse than Cell or The Regulators, but it certainly was a 2-star read for me, and it certainly ain't that pretty at all. So, alright, so there you go. This is my 2019 reads tier ranking. Hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly think it was a fun idea, and I had fun making it. If y'all like this, maybe I'll do this again in 2020, as long as I don't have too many books to do. Even with 55, this was I feel like a long one. I feel like it's going to be a long-ass video, but I feel like most of my videos are long, so like, if you don't like long videos, I don't know what you're doing here. So, thank you all for sticking with me in 2019. It was, a little awkward to start, a little hard to find your footing, but I certainly feel like I had a great year, and I've gotten tons of good feedback and met a lot of great people, and it's been incredible for me, and I hope 2020 is as good a year, and I hope I get to talk to more of you and meet more of you, and we just get to have more fun together. So if you did a book ranking or best and worst books, let me know, and I would love to see it, love to talk to you about it, and until then, I will see you next time.